do his stuff a little bit yesterday morning. He's been the CEO of Mega since February this year. Before that, he was the Chief Executive of Internet New Zealand. He's worked within government and private corporations within New Zealand itself, and for the past 2 decades has been closely watching the social, economic, political and cultural impact of the internet. Time for me to stop speaking.
Well, good morning. Kia ora. Special shout out to people from Australia. How many are here? Ooh. Well, presumably you've seen the sheep and the hobbits and everything else. Can I recommend our literature and our music while you're here? It's getting quite well. So I've got about 45 minutes, and I'd like to leave a lot of time for questions at the end. So I'll get through some of this, but I'm really more interested at the end if people have questions. I hope you do, otherwise I'll just keep talking. Right, I wanted to talk about 3 things this morning, and I've sort of arranged them from quite granular and specific to a discussion that I think we should have, which is what I think one of the biggest challenges facing the open source community today, which is re-engineering the internet. And then I want to end with a slightly aspirational note on why I think O is now the new E, and what does that actually mean for all of us. So I do know that in Australia Mega isn't that well known, and I thought I'll just start with a little bit of the backstory about Mega for those of you who aren't familiar with it. That's a newspaper shot of the 4 co-defendants in the Mega Upload extradition case. From left to right, there's Kim.com, Matthias Ortman, Finn Potato, and Brown van der Kolk. Now, Mega Upload, as on the 20th of January last year, was claimed to be about 4% of the global internet. So that's pretty large. And on the 20th of January, there was a raid on Kim's house. Kim was arrested. Simultaneously, there were 6 other people who were arrested, 4 in New Zealand, 3 overseas. And the timing of the raid was to ensure that they can get as many people as possible. And Mega Upload was promptly shut down. I was working for Internet New Zealand at that time, and I got a phone call from a couple of journalists asking about Mega Upload and did we have any comments. And I'm ashamed to say I had never heard of Mega Upload. So I went and spoke to my daughter. And she told me about Mega Upload, which is interesting. And then I found out a lot more, obviously, as things went on. And over a period of months that followed, the 4 of them got released from jail, and they sat around and didn't have much to do because they were on bail, awaiting the various cases that had been filed. And it turned out that the government raid on Kim's house was illegal, that the spying that they did on them was illegal. A whole lot of illegal things were uncovered. And it became clear that there was a fair amount of spying that happened. And the story goes, of course, that Kim, as a good gamer, suspected something was happening because the latency in his Call of Duty meant that he was getting killed far more often than in the case. And then they sat down and said, look, what happens if we set up this cloud storage with privacy and security and try and keep the spies away from that? And that's really where Mega originated from. And that's sort of the backstory. And it was launched on the 20th of January this year, 1 year exactly from the raid. And Mega has called itself the privacy company, and one of the things that I keep talking about is that its main goal is privacy for everyone. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time unpacking this, because I think sometimes we don't quite understand what that means. And we've had discussions, and because the conference this year focuses on identity and privacy, we've spoken about privacy directly and tangentially a couple of times. But I find that most people, including experts, and most certainly the public, don't actually quite understand what privacy is and what it means for privacy versus being anonymous online. So I'd like to give an example of why I think this is really important to understand, because it is from an expectations point of view, it's from what the organization does, what the company does. Now, we've published, as I mentioned yesterday at the surveillance panel, we've published a guidance on our website of how Mega deals with requests for takedown, for copyright, as well as everything else, law enforcement, surveillance requests. We've actually published online exactly our policy and what we do. And one of the exceptions that we decided to the high bar of only handing over personal information when we are required to do so is we made a choice about child exploitation material. We as a company decided that as a policy, we did not want Mega to be used for child exploitation material. And when we get a complaint from anyone that a particular file may be illegal, we pass it on to the Department of Internal Affairs because they're the experts. I certainly don't want our staff to look at what is really crap material and try and make a legal decision on whether it's illegal or not. It's actually really complex. It's also very horrifying. And so we have, just as many other internet intermediaries I suspect have, is we have an arrangement with the Department of Internal Affairs. We send them the file, they have a look at it, and they tell us whether it's illegal under New Zealand law or not. And we're slightly narrow. It's not complete censorship. It's just a child exploitation bit that we have decided to take particular action against. And if they tell us in their professional opinion that it's illegal, then we hand over personal information. We hand over IP addresses, we hand over access logs, and we know that the Department of Internal Affairs will use that information to track down who the person is. And quite often, it's international cooperation that's required. That, I still think, is consistent with privacy. There's a due process, there's a very high bar, there's clear transparency of what the intention is, and yet we as a company hand over the personal information of people who choose to use Mega for illegal purposes for child exploitation. Now, that's different from being anonymous online. People can try and be anonymous. I personally think it's really, really hard for anyone to be anonymous online today. And true anonymity is about not knowing the identity of the person at all. Clearly, privacy flows from that because you don't know who the person is. But it's important, and there's a lot of discussion that happened around how do we get more secure email. And I see a lot of the discussion around that was actually people wanting to remain anonymous. And there was a discussion about metadata and how email protocols are inherently public. So I think it's important that anyone who looks at Mega, and my own personal viewpoint is, I don't think most mainstream business services can actually offer anyone any great degree of being anonymous. And it's up to people if they choose to do that, then they have to use things like Tor or something else, but it won't be Mega. The second thing is privacy for everyone. And this is the bit that I'm actually really excited about, is how do we get privacy and working for everyone? That's essentially crypto, right? And everyone here is an exception. You guys know what crypto is. You know how to make it work. You have the incentive. You know, if PGP is designed to frustrate people, but you know how to make it work, right? When I look at Mega, I think about my mother. Her view of the web is exactly her view of a car. don't know how it works. Yeah, it's got an engine somewhere, and you turn the key, it goes on, and you drive, and it just works, right? I'm really frustrated in trying to explain to her the difference of closing a tab versus closing the entire window. But that's the people that Mega's aim for. It's privacy for everyone. And it's a real challenge. This isn't meant necessarily for corporates who have huge technical expertise and the ability to keep their data confidential. They should be trying to do so. It's more for professionals, individuals, small and medium enterprises. How do we get the bar set higher for people to get privacy and security online? And these are the three things that I've learned in the 9 months that I've worked with Mega, is how do you make crypto work for everyone? And we've heard refrains of this during the conference, but I just want to emphasize this. It has to just work, right? No downloads, no plugins, no extra steps. It just has to work in the browser. People, to me, it's very much like HTTPS. Go to a bank website or you go to an e-commerce website. We've got it to a point where, for most people, they don't know what HTTPS is necessarily. It just works. And I think that's the goal that we should all be aiming for when we look at privacy and security online. It just has to work for everyone. The second thing we learned, and I learned, was people are unwilling to compromise in functionality for getting security and privacy online. And so Mega is designed essentially to do everything client-side. And that really raises a lot of issues. Things that we would just expect normal, like searching a thread or understanding how to sort emails or sort messages. These are things, all server-side functions. Mega can't do it because everything is client-side. It's all encrypted on the server side. People are not willing to compromise for privacy and security online. They're not willing to compromise in terms of speed, in terms of functionality, in terms of what their expectations are. And the third thing, I suppose, which is really important, is think about the network effect. And very often, people talk to me about the problems and dangers with a centralized system. And why isn't it that everyone should take up, a BitTorrent message protocol or roll your own kind of things where you go and install your own client? The problem with that is that if you're aiming it for the average person, there's no way they're going to be able to figure out what keys are, how to manage keys, how to revoke keys. And there's a huge network effect, right? Skype is crap, but it's still there. Why? Because everyone uses it. And so even if we have really good technology, even if it just works, even if there's no compromises, you've got to get scale. And that's how I think that Mega is going to be successful, is because we try and make sure that all these three things work for everyone. And this is important. We have a lot of products and services that we technically are competent to use. And we sort of have it in our mind that crypto and security are a goal, but they're not for most people. They just want their email. They just want to put their documents up or get access to their documents anywhere. And so Mega's goal and vision is privacy for everyone. So just emphasizing privacy is not the same as being anonymous, and secondly, it's for everyone. So just wanted to give you a few numbers. I suspect it's been quite well publicized, but numbers really help to flesh out the story. So Mega was launched as a beta service in 20th of January, so that's about 9 months. There's in excess of 5 million people who are using it at the moment. What we track quite a bit is bandwidth. That's the amount of uploads and downloads, because the monetization eventually will come from bandwidth more than anything else. At the moment, our peak bandwidth is 160 gigabits a second, and for those of you who understand, that's actually quite a big number. The entire New Zealand international bandwidth is less than that. There's about 300 million files, average for about 3 million every day. And when Mega was launched, I hadn't joined at that point, and I read all the media reports, and I was still thinking about whether to join or not. Was this was a lot of coverage about this is just a new way of encouraging copyright infringement, and that Kim and his team are somehow super smart in coming up with what they call plausible deniability. And the whole reason why Mega was encrypted was because it would provide Kim and his team with plausible deniability of copyright infringement. And there was a lot of coverage in the media about how Mega would be used for encouraging copyright infringement. And I'm really, really happy to say that that hasn't happened. We get about 100 takedowns on average every day for alleged copyright violation. And as a part of our policy, provided the information is correct, we do take it down, every single one of them. But 100 takedowns is a very, very small amount. As a comparison, Google takes down 8 every second, 8 files every second. About 15 million YouTube videos are taken down every month. So 100 takedowns on a 3 million base is very small, and the entire noise around Mega being used for copyright infringement has just gone away. In the last 6 months, there's been very little noise, and it's not because copyright owners aren't searching the web, it's because it isn't happening. In terms of popularity, Alexa is sort of okay, doesn't actually really reflect reality correctly, but for those who track it, Mega's about 800-ish at the moment. And I think for any website to be in the top 1,000 in 9 months is actually quite good going. Mega's hosted in Germany, Luxembourg, and recently in New Zealand. Our future expansion, I would say, was probably more likely to be Luxembourg, because Luxembourg has both great laws, but it also has very cheap and well-connected internet infrastructure. Mega is still in beta. The reason for that is that we look at Dropbox, which has got 175 million customers, as the big guy in the industry, and there's 2 things that we still need to do to match their functionality. One is an iOS app, and the other is a Windows sync client. All of that should be happening in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're also relaunching our website in the next 1 or 2 weeks, and I'll talk a little bit about that. At that point, I think it would be fair to say that Mega will come out of beta. Very briefly, main design feature which sets Mega apart is end-to-end encryption, which means that essentially things are encrypted on the person's device, sent up to the cloud, and it is only decrypted once it is back on the device. So Mega only ever sees encrypted files. It's also user controlled in the sense of the keys are held by the person himself or herself. Mega has no way of retrieving or getting those encryption and decryption keys. Most functionality is client-side, and while today Mega is a cloud storage collaboration company, I think the future very much is communication. The nature of email in particular mirrors physical mail, and actually that doesn't make sense. When we work with email, we very rarely, when we exchange documents, we rarely do anything other than either store it somewhere or edit it and send it back. So a lot of email, particularly to do with files, doesn't actually make sense to send files around. That's just the physical analogy of how mail works. So I think there's a new communication paradigm or communication way will come in the future. So encrypted chat, messaging, video, voice. I'm certainly looking forward to that because I still want to figure out how can I talk to the rest of my team without being spied on by video or Skype or whatever. There was a particular interest in people asking what open source components does Mega use. Now that link at the bottom isn't live yet. That the new website that's coming up for Mega is extensively re-engineered, extensively using open source components. That's the link that will work. Mega has devoted one page simply to thanking and acknowledging all the open source components that we use. The The HTML5 game, I'm just going to pick out because I think it's pretty cool. At the moment, when people sign up to Mega, we have to collect entropy from their mouse to generate their keys. And it's sort of fiddly and fidgety and people don't quite get it. The new Mega website would have a game based on the NSA. And people playing that game would generate the entropy for their keys. So that's a list of most of, not all the open source components that we use. Most of them are client-side, and it's a fairly long list, and as you can see, Mega is essentially a JavaScript client-side. Open source from Mega, we've got what we call a software development kit, which is how to use the APIs that Mega has correctly. Because when Mega launched, there was a lot of third-party developers who essentially hacked Mega, and what we found was that they were breaking the crypto. And for those of you who are familiar with crypto, you know that your biggest challenge is implementation of the crypto. Once you can do everything right, and it's one small mistake means you've broken your entire chain of trust. So we've got a SDK in C++. It's not yet up on GitHub. It's going to be up, that's where the URL will be. Our newest employee, guy called Guy Kloss from AUT, that's his job. He's just cleaning it up at the moment. And I think that the SDK is perhaps the most important part for you to know, because you can use that to build your own apps and use Mega as a back-end encrypted storage. And you are shielded from all the complexity of crypto. You simply have to use the APIs. And over time, I'm sure it'll be in other languages, including Perl, Ruby, PHP, whatever. And Mega will open source all the client-side applications. The timing is a bit complex and the details are a bit complex because for those of you who are following the ticks of the telco spying bill, one of the get-out clauses which are in the bill at the moment, and presumably I think today it will become the act, is that for those people who provide encryption, they have to decrypt the communication, which is very problematic and unacceptable to Mega. We argued long and hard that even though Mega provides the encryption, we don't hold the decryption keys. So how are we going to comply with that? The government refused to listen. And in our submission, there was only one thing that they listened to, which is actually to do with open source. So the get-out clause in the telco spying bill is that if the encryption is offered for retail sale, or it is applied if a company applies it as an agent of the customer, then they don't have to decrypt it. And we've known for a long time that that's exactly the path that Mega's going to go down. And our submission to the government was, why do you want to insist that the get-out clause should be for retail sale only? Why not for open source? And that's the only thing in our submission that they accepted. So Mega will open source its client side. That is the path it will use to make sure that it doesn't have to decrypt communications under the telco standard. We haven't spoken about that, so you guys are the first to hear about it. It's always been there, that's always been the plan, but we were just waiting for it to become law so that I wouldn't call it a loophole, but at least an escape clause actually does exist. Right, the second thing I wanted to talk about was this re-engineering the internet. I think a really good comment was the first comment at the end of the surveillance panel yesterday, which was, I'm outraged with the amount of surveillance that's happening by governments in particular that we probably suspected but didn't quite know until, thanks to Snowden, it's now well documented and well understood. The issue to me is, well, outrage is lovely, but that doesn't actually change things. So we as the open source community, I think, have to acknowledge that the internet has played and is playing an extremely important role for our community. I mean, what would open source be without the internet? It's, the web provides us with a way to get information, shared information, communication. More importantly, it allows us a way to collaborate. But here's the problem. The internet now, I believe, is fundamentally broken and compromised. The internet is very simple, it's a few protocols, and all it's supposed to do is to provide peer-to-peer communications. But we've now got a situation where every element of the internet is compromised. How can we now say that the internet is fit for purpose? It just isn't. So what do we do about it? Well, partly we can say, and I've been saying in the past, is a political answer. But this isn't about politics. Another day, another time, another forum, we can have a discussion about politics. But what do we, at a technical level, think about the government and governments around the world? It isn't just the NSA and the GCHQ or the New Zealand government. It's pretty much every government, right? The IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, is now moving to a point where when they develop RFCs, the persistent threats, persistent monitoring of the internet connection is an assumed condition. So, what do we do about it? I hope some of you have read this. Bruce Schneier basically wrote this article in The Guardian where he says the US government has betrayed the internet. I think it's more than that. I think every government has betrayed the internet, but in particular the US government, both because it funded the initial development of the internet and was always considered to be the benign benefactor. It's time to take it back. I'm not going to read the full thing, but essentially it's a really good article that I encourage you to read, because essentially it's a call to arms. And that's what I wanted to echo this morning. Is if we are outraged, if we do believe that the internet is no longer fit for purposes, then I think the open source community needs to rise up to that challenge. We have to ask ourselves, if they take away the tools that we need for our work, should we not be able to do something about it? And we are most effective at that technical level. This is not the internet the world needs, or the internet its creators envisioned. We need to take it back. And a lot of that lies with the engineering community. Now, not for 1 second am I saying that a technical response alone is going to be sufficient. Absolutely not. But the technical response is a necessary condition. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And the scale of the is, the scale of the channel essentially is everything, right? It's the end devices, it's the routers, it's the internet backbone, it's the switches, it's the applications, it's the standards, it's the specifications, it's the apps that run. Everything today needs to be re-looked at and re-engineered. That's the scale of the challenge. So it doesn't matter where you fit into the stack, where you feel most comfortable. I would urge you to do what you can to make the internet again fit for purpose and take it back. And open source has got such an important role to play, because it's open source that really helps us to get back trust. Now, I'm not saying that open source equates to trust automatically, but I think it's a necessary condition. So we've got to look at the protocols, implementation systems. We've got to get openness in the open source back. And the third and final point is to talk about why I think O is the new E. For the last few years at least, everything has been E whatever. And I think we're getting to a point where it's actually O whatever. So, anyway, that for some reason that image isn't there. But earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, I wrote a blog post thinking about this. Because as you get to the end of the year or beginning of a year in magazines, you get all of these wonderful articles about what's coming next and what the trends are and all of that. And I just found that it doesn't actually help me at all. And this year at the beginning, to me, one of the biggest trends that I thought was really important for everyone to try and understand and accept was this thing about everything being open, the trend towards openness. Open government, open education, open research, open journalism, open justice, open culture. And so the success of the open source community, I think, has played a very large role in the spread and understanding of what openness is. And the open source community can, based on the success that they've had with software and then with hardware, there are some elements of the community that we've learned that can be used in all these other new open initiatives. So if you think about open government, we used to talk about e-government for a long time, and then figured out that, well, e-government actually is just a repackaging of physical or real-world processes into some sort of wasteful electronic ways. And we had to try and understand what does open government mean. And a lot of that is around things that the open source community does really well. Universal access, community building, merit-based contributions, use and reuse, peer review, transparency. These are the things that we all know and accept and understand, that these are the necessary conditions for open source, but also open anything to succeed. And so to me, this is the third challenge that I think we face in the open source community. We need to go beyond software, and I know many of you do. But think about it. We've contributed and are benefiting from open source software. But why can't we benefit and provide and drive some of these other initiatives? Whether it's government or justice or media or journalism, or take your pick, take whatever interests you. But it's the open source community's challenge and opportunity to step forward and tell people how it works. What does openness actually mean? What are the things that work and what don't? What is the fundamental difference between closed systems, proprietary systems, and open systems? How can you have open government if you're not willing to listen? If you're not willing to go and talk to people? If you're not willing to accept merit-based contributions? That's the things that you and I need to do. So those are the three things that I wanted to talk about, slightly loosely connected. Mega really benefits from open source. It couldn't be what it is without open source, and sees contributing back to the open source community as a core part of its business. I think the internet is fundamentally broken, and we have the need and opportunity to re-engineer it. Then we need to go beyond not only the internet, but society itself. So that was me. Pretty much on target. So we've got about 15 minutes, and I'd love to get questions. Absolutely anything.
Hi, Vikram. Thank you for going to Auckland. Thank you for your work. There we go. Thank you very much. Have you seen the statement that was recently released by at a Monza video conference, where ICANN, W3C, APNIC, a bunch of the internet governing bodies basically made joint statements, essentially indicating that they're planning to break ranks with the US and always trying to prevent the balkanization of the internet.
Yeah, I think for a long time, there hasn't been a single US government. It's been arms of the government. And we've had different parts of the US government quite often working across purposes. And I think the internet governance bodies are one of those cases where one arm, which is essentially the NICTA arm, has been quite good in trying to let ICANN and the other internet governance bodies have a fairly large remit. And at the end of the day, you've got to ask, there's a fundamental tension there between the different arms of the US government. And I think that people are beginning to realize that. But I worry about the response from some countries like Brazil. So, do we really want to balkanize the internet? Is that a better answer? And I don't think it is. We have to come up with a better answer of how do we get the internet as a global network to work without breaking it up, because that throws away the good things with the bad things.
It can't work as long as it's under control from a single entity.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the right answer is, because the UN comes with its own problems. Because the UN then had Wicked and all the other things, where the ITU essentially acting on behalf of some pretty draconian regimes, wants to legitimize surveillance and control and balkanization. I just can't think of a single good answer at the moment. But I know that everything that we've got at the moment isn't working.
I think I really agree with you on the idea that we need to open up some of the governance and some of the sort of community work, and where open source can really lead in that. I'm just wondering how much you've seen of some of the things like GovHack and some of the open data initiatives, and what do you think is going on in that space?
Okay, when I worked for the government, the State Services Commission, it was my team that originally started opening up government data. So I've obviously got a huge, it's almost like looking at your baby growing up. And I think it's become clear that data is useful, but without it becoming information, and without it becoming actionable information, then we have a problem. So I'm absolutely in favor of all of these, but I think we've still got a long way to go before we can convert that into really useful outcomes. And we've had some really good examples where people are making that data more easily available. There's a lot of good open source and free tools that help us visualize, understand, mine the data. But eventually, I think we need to do a lot more to convert that data into results. So that would be my take on that. All for it.
Hi. So I'm over here. I'm here.
Okay. Sorry.
It's probably a very stupid question, and probably lots of you are going to say, oh, well, that's really easy to answer. But you're saying your files are end-to-end encoded, and they're always encoded when they're at Mega. But in the case of child exploitation, you're going to send files to an internal service to check them. How can you do that?
Oh, it's an excellent question. I actually get asked all the time, mostly about copyright. The same thing. If you've got encrypted files, how do you know if they are illegal or infringing? And the answer is Mega doesn't know. What happens is that when people share in Mega, they can either share privately in a closed loop or publicly. And whichever way they share, especially publicly, they have to then have to distinctly see that the link. So if you see any, you'll see any file in Mega, actually anyone. First bit is the location of the file, and the last bit is the digital compute. So whenever anyone sharing the secret file publicly, they're going to share the location and the digital compute. In effect, it makes no difference whatsoever.
Themes in your talk, but in particular, given where we're hosting this event and the New Zealand focus on open source and open everything, is how can our economy, how can we in the industry benefit? What's your take on this? How do we take this out? And not just within New Zealand, but help drive New Zealand as part of this open everything?
I think the irony of the internet is that it has made both global and local more important. It's a global network, so there's a lot happening at a global level. It's also made local extremely important. So both have become really important, and they sort of feed off each other. So maybe if we take a specific example, it becomes easier. I suspect a lot of you know and have worked potentially on Ushahidi, which is the crisis management system. And so you have this lovely global flavor of a open source crisis management system where everyone contributes to. And then it is implemented locally in the case of a crisis, and then improved locally and then fed back to the global system. I first came across it particularly when it was being used in response to the Christchurch earthquakes, and extremely impressed. And the New Zealand community who worked on Ushahidi actually did a significant contribution back to the global one. So to me that's a really good example of how, whether it's open government, open media, there's an element of international but localization of benefits and then feeding back to both ways.
Based on the laws, based on the laws that will be on the statute books after Texas passed, do you believe that there's any way that the government can compel you to subvert the encryption and not tell your users about it based on what will be on the statute books after Texas passed?
No, and we will never accept it. If we have to, I don't think it's not in the law, and therefore we will never accept it. Now, if in the future a law does change, which requires Mega to have secret surveillance of any sort, we will leave New Zealand. It's as simple as that. Mega's customer base is 0.7% in New Zealand. It's out of our top 10 countries, only one speak English. It's most definitely a global company. New Zealand's a wonderful place at the moment to have a privacy-focused global company. If that changes, I'm pretty sure that Mega will leave New Zealand if it has to. But it will never go across those bottom lines. One of the things that I'm doing at the moment is actually writing down what our bottom lines are. I'm thinking of publishing that just as we did with the guidance. And one of our bottom lines is we will never participate in mass surveillance, or we will never subvert the architecture or the keys that are held by our customers.
Back in May, the New Yorker magazine began to offer a service called Strong Box to support anonymous whistleblowers so that we could get information out of government and into the public sphere, protecting the sources. Using an open source package called Dead Drop, which is Mega contributing to that project, or will you support anonymous communications through your system?
Well, I think I think it's a really wonderful idea. I think the need to be anonymous is important. But there's good and bad that happens. And the very nature of being anonymous means you can't distinguish between good and bad. So, if you're a dissident fighting a repressive regime, then being anonymous really is helpful. If you are a terrorist or drugs or whatever, being anonymous helps. And the very nature of being anonymous is there's good and bad, just as there is in everything. And Mega's made a choice that its service and its mission in life is privacy and not being anonymous. So I think do we support being anonymous? Absolutely, for good. But I think the company will stay away from specifically promoting anonymous services when its focus is on privacy. But absolutely understand the need for people to be anonymous and the good stuff that comes out of it.
Right, we've got time for one more question. I'm going to go for Joel at the back. So, thanks.
Being that Mega obviously has some serious hosting bills to pay, how are you paying? How are you making money? Assuming the service is free.
Okay. What's the business model?
Yeah.
Yep. So the standard business model is we've got 50 gigabytes of free space, which I think is huge. And then people start paying if they want more than that. Our lowest here is 500 gigabytes. and 1 terabyte of bandwidth, which costs about 10 euros a month. So we price in euros because we want to stay away from the US jurisdiction. So no servers, no .com, no domain names, no employees, no US dollar. As far as we're concerned, the US has no jurisdiction over Mega. So yeah, it's 10 euros a month, which I think is globally cheaper and hugely competitive, simply because of our scale. We're able to offer really, really cheap. But right now, we don't even enforce the 50 gigabyte limit. There are people who've got terabytes of data and pay us nothing, which is okay. As a startup, the main thing is the network effect, which means growth. And we're in no hurry and in no problem in monetizing. So no advertising, it's all about speed, it's all about making a wonderful experience, getting more people to sign up. At the point Mega, I would say perhaps becomes slightly bigger, all the functionalities rolled out, the value proposition is clear, we start imposing those limits, and we start monetizing. But at the moment, it's the nature of the startup industry. We just try and grow as quickly as possible, and venture capitalists and other people who are contributing money value, just like anything else, they value each person. We have a discussion with them on what that number should be. I think it should be that high, they think it's that low. We settle on a number. Mega is quite highly valued, and we have no problem in raising money, but absolutely understand and know that monetization will happen. And I must say, people like Kim have taught me a lot about business models, and how and when to monetize is an art. And if we can become profitable in 2 weeks, but then our growth will just taper off. And today, with no advertising and still in beta, we're still growing at 10, 12,000 every day without doing anything. Now imagine if we start cranking it, it will just shoot up.
Thank you so much for coming along and talking to us today and yesterday.